What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Time for a brand new build experience in Skyrim. Of course, with the release of Anniversary Edition last year, there's plenty of new content that has been added to the game, introducing artifacts from the lore that have featured in previous entries, as well as more quests, homes, and armor options. With all this in mind, we have tailored this new series of Anniversary builds to utilize the best of this content, and today I present to you the Dark Lord, a sorcerer, a warlock, an individual who will stop at nothing to acquire ultimate power over his reality by leveraging his knowledge of Oblivion and his power over the daedra. There is no bridge he will not cross, no vile or corrupted deed he will not undertake in order to achieve his goals of ultimate power and vast domain. But before we explore the Dark Lord, I want to let you know that we've been fortunate enough to have a sponsor for this video, Raid Shadow Legends. This mobile RPG is all about using the right champions to overcome any challenge. You can use the links below to download Raid on mobile or PC, and there are now over 600 champions to unlock as you fight through the story campaign, the arena, clan boss mode, and the Doom Tower. For clans, you'll want your friends' usernames, and mine is Fudge Killer. Raid's newest clan boss is the Hydra. There are 6 unique heads that are each like a boss battle of their own, possessing unique powers and weaknesses. The Head of Mischief is one that causes pure chaos by targeting a fully buffed up champion, stealing all their buffs, and then spreading them to the current 4 Hydra heads in battle. It can even redirect your attacks onto other heads, making defeating it quite challenging. The Head of Blight is another one to watch out for. It will poison and place leech debuffs on your team and shroud all Hydra heads in a poison cloud that makes it hard for you to land any attacks. In addition to boss battles, it's fun to test out different mixes of champions to see which combination is best to beat a certain campaign level. I also just enjoy scanning through all the aesthetic champion designs on offer. This month there's a bunch of new champions, a brand new Faction Wars crypt for the Shadowkin faction, and loads of New Year's events and tournaments. Raid is also giving away a limited edition legendary champion based on esports star Simple. All you have to do is log in for 7 days between now and January 28th, and you'll be able to experience all the sharpshooting potential he has to offer. Hit the link in the description or scan our QR code to get a huge head start in Raid. You'll get a free champion, Ina, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get into the game. You can find all the treasure up here. But now let's dive into the backstory. My name is Myron Dureni. I am a descendant of the Dureni clan, the great clan of elves who stood against an empire and ruled High Rock with absolute power, until their very own spawn became greedy and coveting, pathetic half-breeds that wedged themselves into politics and power, only to squabble over farms and land. A pity. I was born in what I would call the twilight of the Dureni, on the Isle of Balfiera, year 151 of the 4th era. The Dureni had done nothing in centuries but congregate around the adamantine tower and ruminate on past glories. In my youth, I was tutored by an endless string of academics, taught history and magic and enchanting. My ancestors were pioneers in the art of summoning, of conjuration, and this was of great interest to me. I was endlessly fascinated with worlds beyond our own, entire planes of Oblivion inhabited by vast catalogues of daedra, large, small, and sentient. These realms were still largely unexplored, largely misunderstood, and at that time seemed a far more interesting investigation than the trivial politics of the Iliac Bay, or another lecture about the greatness of Raven Dureni. Thankfully, if there was one thing of true use to be garnered from my place among my clan, it was the access to vast resources of academic texts, including those on the daedra. I read of Clavicus Vile, whose sphere is the granting of power and wishes through ritual invocations and pact. I read of Hermaeus Mora, whose sphere is scrying of the tides of fate, of the past and future as read in the stars and heavens, and in whose dominion are the treasures of knowledge and memory. And I read of Namira, whose sphere is the ancient darkness, known as the Spirit Daedra, ruler of sundry dark and shadowy spirits, associated with spiders, insects, slugs, and other repulsive creatures which inspire mortals with an instinctive revulsion. The daedric princes all inspired curiosity within me, but none of them captured my attention more than Mehrunes Dagon, the exalted and most puissant lord of blood and flames, master of razors, sovereign of destruction, father of cataclysm and ambition manifest. I researched all that I was allowed and not allowed. I would begin the employ of Breton merchants to acquire a library of obscure texts. Of course, I had to sift through an abundance of proselytizing books of anti-daedric inquiry that emerged after the Oblivion crisis. I nearly set ablaze the merchant who tried to sell me such books as rare prizes. Charlatans amuse me at times. The author was even listed as a primate of the Akatosh chantry. I can't believe he thought such a ruse would work. Perhaps it was a trick fit for the uneducated masses of Wayrest. I started employing more professional curators after that, and eventually I was in possession of the Mythic Dawn commentaries, a fascinating series written by the head of the cult that brought Tamriel to its knees. Its author, Menkar Cameron, had many things to say, many colourful things about Dagon that only inspired more investigation. I remain unconvinced of all the claims about Mundus as a daedric realm, but it was at this point I came to the conclusion that no such text written upon Tamriel itself would give proper substitute for the raw experience that I sought. And so I began studying paths into the realms of Oblivion. I was young then, inexperienced, only 18 years of age, and so I could not rely on my own magical prowess to get me into Oblivion. I fled from my home with a healthy handful of family fortune and began my search for daedric cults and witch covens. I employed mercenaries to keep me safe. I tricked knights into thinking I was out to destroy such covens and cults, only to abandon or turn on them once their use as security had passed. My journeys took me all over High Rock, and eventually I found myself in the presence of a tribe of Reachmen. They had many things to say on the Daedra, lots of it gibberish, but there were some wise among them. In exchange for certain sums of gold and magical artifacts taken from my home, I was helped to perform a summoning ritual that would get me into Oblivion. Under bright moon, a sacrifice taken from a local village was strapped over stone, had their heart ripped out in their traditional custom, and soon after, scents of sulphur permeated the air, red sparks flickered around our feet, and in an instant, a great flash of flame opened a portal before us. Out stepped a Ruinarch. I was in awe, though also a little terrified, in all honesty. Reading about the Daedra and experiencing them were entirely different. The Ruinarch spoke.
"Who summons me? Quickly! I have little time to spare on the whims of mortals." I
spoke up. Probably sounded more fearful than I thought. "Me. This sacrifice was made so that you may take me to the Deadlands." The Ruinarch, without hesitation, grabbed me in the lock of his forearms, and his demon eyes stared straight into mine.
"Very well. I have no time to waste." The
Ruinarch returned to the Deadlands with me in tow, and there I was, thrown to the ground in the desert of rust and wounds. Red lightning, smoke, and sulphur filled the skies. Rivers of lava flowed under dark towers of spike and spine. The Ruinarch left me and returned to his business. In retrospect, I had probably not thought this through. I was in the Deadlands with no clear way out. In a way, I was glad. I had entered Oblivion and left Mundus behind, but I was unprepared, too ambitious. I tread across hot ground through the Deadlands, lashed by Harada roots and choked by the poisonous fumes of spittle plants. I was harassed by scamps and died by hunting packs of clan fear. I was slowly regretting my choices. I then came across a Zivalai, who quickly outmatched me and made of me a plaything. I was tortured for years, I think, experimented upon day. I lost track of all time. I cannot explain just how much joy it brought this Zivalai to conduct his experiments upon me. Let's just say the pain that I've experienced here in Mundus does not begin to compare. But of course, let me tell you of my last days in the Deadlands. He tore my eyes out. I was blind, and then I could see again. And when shown my reflection, I saw only 2 void-black spheres, like obsidian beads, sewn into the face of a child's doll. And then I was tossed through a portal, and landed in some rugged land of snow. I felt age seep into me. Decades had passed in the mortal realm. I was not sure how long it had been. It was not as I remember. My eyes. I could see things. The intersection of forces. Things I could not see before. But before I could adjust to my surroundings, a conflict broke out around me, and I was thrown on the back of a cart as a prisoner, straight from one prison to another. Alright, so that is the backstory, and you probably have some questions. The too long didn't read version is that he basically found some Daedric worshipping Reachmen to help him get into the Deadlands out of curiosity via a sacrifice. Also, it should be clear that this guy doesn't really give a rat's about morality, and so he gets into the Deadlands but then is experimented on for an undefined amount of time by a Zivalai who captures him. The most notable feature that he has now is these black eyes. Now, straight up, I thought he looked looked a lot cooler with black eyes and wanted a reason that he has them because they aren't exactly naturally occurring. So by making him a part of some daedric experiment, we could justify his odd appearance, plus I think it adds some cool role-playing. A, it makes him look scarier and more otherworldly, like a Dark Lord type character, and B, I thought it would be cool if the eyes transplanted were actually from a daedric creature of sorts, and so his new eyes actually show him the intersection of worlds. He can see the liminal barrier and where it is weakest, and this is what allows him to excel at conjuring. However, there is a catch. Seemingly, the Zivilai who conducted this experiment can also see through Myron's eyes and can speak to him in his mind. Myron enjoys the eyes, but not the Zivilai's voice and presence so much, and you can roleplay this to a degree, but it's going to exist in your mind entirely while you're roleplaying. However, this dynamic informs more of the Dark Lord's goals. He ultimately would like to achieve unbridled power and seek out knowledge and otherworldly understanding of Oblivion and the Daedra, and his new eyes will help with that immensely, but at the same time, he eventually wants to seek a way to rid himself of the Zivilai's influence. He wants to keep the eyes but ditch the baggage, so he is always trying to acquire more power and more knowledge. Hopefully by role-playing the Zivilai dynamic, you can further rationalize some interesting decisions in the game outside of "Mwahahaha, I'm an evil wizard." But at the same time, taking great inspiration from Sauron of Middle-earth, this character really is an evil wizard, so no mortal morality can hold him back. Remember though, the driving force for this character is power at any costs, not to do evil things just for the enjoyment in itself. It is simply that he will do whatever it takes to attain godlike power, but also make sure he doesn't have to share it with the Zivilai. Who knows how much influence this Daedra really has over him. Now in terms of quests, this guy will be tackling many of the Daedric quests. He is obsessed with all things otherworldly and desires the power that can be acquired from them. He will procure all Daedric artifacts, if not to use, then at least to add to his very own collection. Collecting most powerful artifacts is a good goal for this character, including Dragon Priest masks, and with such an expansive collection, he will need a place to store all of this, and you have two options that come with the Anniversary Edition. Firstly, and this is my preference, Mirwatch. This magical tower in the swamps of Morthul. It has places to store and display many of your magical artifacts, plus I feel a remote tower is chilling. Alternatively, there is also the Vampire Home Bloodchill Manor, which also fits the bill for the remote look, plus it's more evil looking. However, it suits a vampire more. You don't have to be a vampire to get or use the home, but up to you. Either works well. Speaking of vampires, the Volkihar questline in Dawnguard probably fits most. However, I do find that for this character, I like the Black Eyes aesthetic and wanted a different kind of evil vibe to the blood-sucking vampire. More magically malevolent sorcerer rather than dangerous predator. But you could become a vampire if you wanted to, as it can still fit the whole desire for power thing. But speaking of vibes, we will discuss skills more in the skills section. However, we do have one-handed as a backup skill, and the Mace of Molag Bal can give off some really cool evil overlord vibes, like Sauron in the opening of the Fellowship of the Rings. Also, pay special attention to anything Mehrunes Dagon. The Dawnstar Museum will be of particular fascination, and he will most definitely want to acquire Mehrunes Razor. And also, the new questline, The Cause, is a brilliant option, and he'll want to get as close as he can to the Mythic Dawn cult so that he can get closer to Dagon. And for the first time, he'll be able to re-enter the Deadlands and explore from a position of power and competence as opposed to last time. Here you can get the Daedric Blade Torment, which is another great one-handed option, but also you can get the Daedric Horse, which is a very fitting mount for this Dark Lord character. I will link a video in the description which walks through the quest and shows you how to get all the new stuff. Now, in regards to factions, I mentioned you could join the Volkihar or even do the Dawnguard if, like me, you didn't want this character to be a vampire. So you do this because of curiosity about Harkon and his vampires and what power they may hold, and also you're eliminating the competition. The College of Winterhold is a natural choice as it allows you to explore your magical potential and grants access to academic resources. It also gives access to the Master Conjuration quest, as well as access to many spell tomes. The Staff of Magnus is also a powerful artifact to collect. You could do the Dark Brotherhood if you really wanted more to do, but he won't really be stealthing, just walking in, no bonus, straight up killing style. But overall, I'd say while it is a sort of typical evil faction, it doesn't really have any sort of acquiring magical power power angle. However, the main storyline most certainly does, and this guy will be acquiring all the words of power he can and applying them in battle. The discovery of his Dragonborn status brings him immense potential, and further exploration of this power in the Dragonborn DLC is a must. Fighting Miraak and acquiring the Black Books to further his knowledge and power is certainly needed. A final role-playing note to finish up is think of everything through the lens of acquiring power. Most of the time, this is in regard to magical power for himself. However, he can also do some political maneuvering and help people out for the selfish goal of becoming Thane or acquiring power through influence. Ultimately, I really craved a Dark Lord playthrough inspired by Warlocks and Oblivion Sorcerer class archetypes, and with all the new equipment and gear from the Anniversary Edition, I just had to make a Sauron Dark Lord vibe build for you guys. But now let's move out of the role-playing and into the stats. Okay, so clearly the Dark Lord is an Ultima, and we wanted this for two reasons. A, for the 50 Magicka boost at the beginning and the Highborn power, which are very useful for any destruction-centric mage that's going to burn through their Magicka pool regularly. And B, we were going for an imposing Dark Lord inspired by Sauron, and what better way than to pick a High Elf in daedric armor. Now, in terms of stat spread, Magicka is going to be pretty important until the later game where we can cut destruction casting costs with enchanting. So Magicka will be a priority. I'd even suggest for the first 10 levels that you take your starting Magicka of 150 straight to 250, as I think combined with heavy armor and conjuring summons, we should be able to be sturdy enough and get through the battles. However, after this point, I would recommend a pretty even Magicka health split, but this can be adjusted depending on how soon you get all the strong enchanting buffs to cut casting costs. Just remember, conjuration is easy. You summon or raise something once, maybe twice in a battle. As long as you have the initial Magicka, you are fine. It's the destruction magic that will burn through and continue to burn through your Magicka, so that is why we need a Magicka focus. I've already mentioned we use one-handed as a backup, and Bound Sword is a good option as it boosts your conjuration too, and that can be rather powerful early on. But remember, we are aiming for a mage, conjuration destruction-centric fighter here. As for the Standing Stone, you're going to love this, but the Atronach Stone's likely a good pick and is perfectly feasible with great defensive capability because of the spell absorption, and it also has great Magicka boosts. However, there is a consideration that led me towards picking the Lordstone, and that is because A, Dark Lord, and B, the decreased Magicka regeneration from the Atronach is not ideal, as we want it as high as possible for a destruction playstyle so we can keep throwing spells. Plus, a boost to armor rating and magic resistance early on will help mitigate the lack of health early game. But, if I'm being honest, later game, the minus 50% Magicka regen won't really matter much, and the Atronach Stone becomes a great option. Though do remember, it can interrupt your summons with the spell absorption. It's up to you, but for variety's sake, I chose the Lordstone for my playthrough. Just for a change. Alright, time to get into the skills, and they are Destruction, Conjuration, Heavy Armor, Smithing, Enchanting, and One-Handed. The reasoning for all of them should be pretty clear, and the perks will be shown on screen, but I do want to mention that One-Handed in particular is the lowest of low priorities for this build. Perhaps a point in One-Handed mastery early on, and combined with the Bound Sword and Mystic Binding, you'll have a reliable backup damage for when your summons are still on the weaker end, and your Magicka pool isn't great enough to sling destruction spells non-stop. But the only reason I have One-Handed listed is for backup, and late game we have more perks available, and there are some cool daedric artifacts such as the Mace of Molag Bal and Torment to take advantage of. Destruction dual casting is going to be your bread and butter, allowing you to stagger with the impact perk and deal more damage to enemies, and we focus on flames and shock, which I thought would be more fitting for this character. In Conjuration, we have a lot of options, and this character utilizes both necromancy and daedric summoning depending on what the situation calls for, and there are just no limits for this guy. Twin Souls is needed for more summons, and Mystic Binding, like I said, is useful for early game. Heavy Armor, we're just going straight up defense. We don't even need to move faster because we have summons to distract, plus we also use Destruction from afar and can stagger enemies with it, allowing us to gain ground on them. Smithing is obviously needed to maximize our defense and for a reliable method of crafting daedric armor, and Enchanting is needed to truly unlock the power of this character by boosting his gear. Speaking of which, let's talk lock gear. In terms of early game, it's going to be a combo of heavy armors available and likely whatever good enchanted gear you can find or create. The character's daedric aesthetic is something that will need to be worked towards, but options that work well until then, and I think that look cool, are things like the iron plate armor, which is a new version, and keeps to a somewhat menacing looking aesthetic. There's also various spell knight armors, which could be used, ebony works nice, but ultimately we'll be working towards acquiring that daedric armor. Now this armor is actually mostly unique, as in there's new content here. The daedric boots are the classic variety daedric. The gauntlets, however, are slightly different. I actually went for the daedric brawlers gauntlets for the sole reason that they have more spikes on it and it looks cooler. Then we also go for the daedric plate helmet and the daedric plate armor, which is an alternate looking daedric that gives a little bit more of a sorcerer type feel with the red tabard type thing going on. We also have a necklace and ring of your choice. A gold ring reminds me again of Sauron in his armor, but with a ring over the top. But yes, now we're going to get in and smith the hell out of this armor, and you will more than exceed the armor rating cap. But what's most important here is the enchantments. The boots will have one-handed damage boosts and fire resistance, fitting for one who walks the Deadlands. The gauntlets will further increase one-handed damage and boost magicka. Also another reason for low priority on the one-handed perks, because you can just boost damage with enchantments. The necklace will have fortify conjuration and magic resistance, and the ring will have fortify destruction and magic resistance as well. And finally, both the armor and the helmet will have fortify destruction and fortify conjuration. And by the late game, you should have a 75% reduction of casting costs for destruction and conjuration. Now, you can of course reduce them by 100%, but that always makes me feel like I wasted magicka investment, so I still like to make it somewhat fair and keep the need for magicka. Also, this armor is strong as hell, and when you have the ring and necklace giving 40% magic resistance total plus the 25% magic resistance from the Lordstone, you will have 65% magic resistance altogether, and that's all you really need, I think. However, you can push it further to the 85% cap if you really want by gaining 15% from the Agent of Mara ability. However, that quest isn't exactly the idea for this character from a role-playing perspective. But now let's talk weapons. I've spoken about the effectiveness of the bound sword early on, and we will get some cool artifacts like Mehrunes Razor, Torment, and the Mace of Molag Bal, which will make for some deliciously malevolent-looking combinations. However, this is all backup stuff and aesthetic fluff, as effective as they still are. What really takes this character over the moon is the use of staves. Firstly, we want the Black Star. Screw Azura, we want a more powerful artifact. Remember, this guy wants power. He isn't a daedric simp. The Black Star makes everything easier with enchanted weapons and staves, but the main star of the show is the Staff of Hasadoki, one of the new pieces included in the Anniversary Edition. If a target dies within 60 seconds, it fills a soul gem. And when you aren't attacking with this staff, it gives you a ward that protects against spells for 40 points. But most of all, the staff has a crazy knockback effect, which provides the ultimate crowd control for the Dark Lord. We also want to supplement with other staves, and especially since there are new unenchanted staffs, we have more aesthetic options like the Daedric staff, which we made one with Storm Wall for more crowd control, and it just looks cool to spread over the ground. Also, the Player Home Mirrorwatch has a staff enchanter inside, which gives us access to that facet of gameplay without having to wait until we get to Tel Mithrin on Solstheim. Now onto spells and playstyle. This character has a great variety of spells, especially because of the new additions to the game, but we generally stick to the four umbrellas of fire magic, shock magic, necromancy, and daedric summoning. Let's start with the destruction. When it comes to fire and shock, first I have to ask, why not both? The chosen bread and butter spell for this character late game is the Elemental Blast spell, an elemental explosion of 40 points of fire damage and 40 points of shock damage and half as much damage to stamina. In short, it's a fire and shock spell rolled into one, and it looks really cool, plus makes an effective base spell. There is also Elemental Bolt, which is an apprentice version, and Elemental Burst, which is an adept version, so there is a version available for every step along your playthrough. Flame Cloak looks beast and helps wear down enemies that get too close, but alternatively Shock Cloak works well too. There is also the spells, Unbounded Flames and Unbounded Storms, which are powerful expressions of pure destruction, great for the late game, but let's swap it over and talk about Conjuration. Your options are plenty throughout your playthrough, which can be utilized for different scenarios. Flame, Storm and Frost Atronachs, Golden Saints, Dark Seducers, Dremora skeletons and zombies, even an Aelid Lich after the completion of the Cause quest. Of course too, we have Necromancy available for Dead Thralls and Dread Zombies and so on, but there's a cool middle ground that covers space in between in the form of summoning the Bone Colossus and the Ancient Death Priest, both master level summons that are quite powerful and absolutely menacing looking. This character is the Dark Lord after all, and we want him to have some adequately dark summons to match. Use everything at your disposal. But how does this all culminate in a playstyle? Well, once you have your hands on all of the gear available and you're at a point where you don't have to rely on one-handed as a backup and so on, it should be pretty similar your whole way through the game. You're going to want to start off with summoning 1 or 2 summons depending on level and threat, and then optimally use the Staff of Hasadoki for some crowd control, or alternatively the Stormwall Staff or something else, but then get to work with unleashing elemental blasts upon your foes. This character should be pretty beefy with the armor and magic resistance, but again, we do want to keep distance optimally and let the summons handle most of the work. Keep an eye on your magicka and let your summons or undead flex their muscles. But that, ladies and gentlemen, I think is everything you need to know how to play the Dark Lord build. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed playing this new vanilla Skyrim build utilizing the new content that comes with the Anniversary Edition. Again, if at any point you need help with the Cause quest line, there is a video walkthrough linked in the description below. Subscribe for more Elder Scrolls content, builds, lore, and our weekly Elder Scrolls podcast. Thanks so much for all of your support, and do be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, because it really helps out our channel. Thanks again. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.